Greetings from my home to yours. It has been 2 weeks since the murder of George Floyd in our community, and we have been seeking to respond in countless ways, in our communities, in our neighborhoods, in our families. And as we have been showing up to this work, we recognize that the work of anti-racism and anti-oppression, the work of racial and restorative justice, is not just work for this moment, but is work for the long haul. And it is not just outer work, but it is also inner work that requires sustained practice on our part. As I've been thinking about the spiritual practices that can support this work in my own life, I've been thinking about a teaching of Team Dynamics who have been consulting to Unity in our anti-racism and multicultural efforts. This is the practice of listening that they call receiving and believing. It is a kind of listening that does not question the stories that we are hearing. It is the kind of listening that shows up to the stories of someone's experience and believes them wholeheartedly. It doesn't start comparing to our own story. It doesn't start questioning or finding points to debate, but to receive and believe someone else's story and experience as sacred truth. In this moment, we are being asked to receive and believe the stories of Black and Indigenous people of color who are telling us of their experiences with the police, of their experiences with our educational system, of their experiences of our cities and our neighborhoods, and yes, even our congregations. Where this practice of receiving and believing has been showing up in my own ministry has been in my work with colleagues of color around the ways in which we tell the stories of our Unitarian Universalist history, of our living tradition. And one of the things that they have been asking us to change in how we tell that story is to receive and believe the truth that there have been people of color in our movement shaping Unitarian and Universalist faith from the very beginning. And yet their stories are often invisible in the narrative that we tell. And so today I wanted to share 2 stories to contrast the experiences of people of color with others in our movement who have heard the call to ministry, so that we might receive and believe these stories in new ways and find new ways to tell our Unitarian Universalist story. I want to lift up the story of Egbert Ethelred Brown, the first Black man to be ordained to the Unitarian ministry in the United States, and the story of Olympia Brown, the first white woman to be ordained to the American Universalist ministry, and in fact, the first white woman to be ordained to any denomination in the full powers of that ordination. Egbert Ethelred Brown was born in Jamaica in 1875. As a young man, he had a passion for theology and spirituality, and also a passion for math. He was gifted with numbers. In his youth, on a Sunday, he was sitting at a family table and found a pamphlet on the table written by William Ellery Channing about his own version of Christianity and understanding of its nature and theology. And in that moment, Ethelred Brown discovered Unitarianism. He was convinced, he was intrigued. He wanted to find others who might have sympathy with those ideas, who might share his emerging faith as a Unitarian Christian. But he could not find any others in Jamaica. And so he did some self-study and discovered some of the writings of other American Unitarians. He went on to become an accountant, to get married, to have a family of his own, but he continued to pursue his own Unitarian faith. And in his early 30s, he felt that he heard a calling to the Unitarian ministry. But he had no idea what it would take to become a Unitarian minister. So he wrote a letter and he addressed it to any Unitarian minister in New York City, and he sent it off. And it landed on the desk of John Haynes Holmes at the Community Church of New York. And he responded to Ethelred, and he told him that the first step in becoming a Unitarian minister was to come and study at a theological school and get a degree. And so Ethelred saved money of his own, and he got money from family and friends, and he got on a boat to come to the United States to study at Meadville Theological School. But he was turned away at the border because his papers were not in order. It took him another couple of attempts to get on that boat and 3 more years to actually arrive at Meadville to get that degree. But arrive he did, with very little help from the faculty, very little help from the denomination, but only his faith that he was truly called to the Unitarian ministry. He was ordained in 1912 and then faced another obstacle. The faculty, the denomination said, yes, you are now an ordained Unitarian minister, but we don't have a congregation for you. We do not believe that we have a white congregation ready to receive you as its minister. And so he went back to Jamaica and started the Jamaican Unitarian Church on his own. He did that for a few years while continuing to work as an accountant, but never let go of his dream of being part of the American Unitarian movement that he had known in school, and he eventually moved his family to Harlem. And in 1920, he founded the Harlem Community Church of New York. And he served that congregation, building it up from the ground for the next 35 years. He could not afford a living doing the ministry on its own at that church. He continued to work as an accountant to find ways to make ends meet, but he served that church faithfully, committed to building a home and a welcome for all who found a home in our Unitarian faith. He got very little support from the area congregations. He got very little support from the denomination, but he served his faith well. Contrast that to the story of Olympia Brown, who also knew that if she was going to be ordained as the first woman fully ordained in the United States, that she also needed the same degree as the guys. She applied to 2 theological schools, a Unitarian one and a Universalist one. The Unitarian president of that theological school wrote back to her and said, "Oh, I think this is a great idea. I think women should absolutely be in the ministry. But I have to tell you that my faculty and my board won't go for it. And so even though I think it's a great idea and I'm in full support of you, I wish you well. We won't be able to take you in." She got a letter from Ebenezer Fisher, the president of the Universalist Theological School. And he said something very different. In his letter, he said, "I think this is a terrible idea. I don't think women should go into the ministry, and here are all of the reasons I think that this is a bad idea." But at the very end of his letter, there was a paragraph that said, "But you are telling me that you feel called to the ministry by the great head of the church. Far be it from me to tell you what you are hearing from God. If you feel that you are truly being called to the ministry, then we'll take you in. But I think it's a terrible idea." Well, he thought he had discouraged her. And she showed up on the doorstep of that theological school the following August, to his consternation and to the horror of his faculty and the other students. But he was true to his word, and he took her in. And even though it wasn't easy, she got that degree, and he preached her ordination sermon 4 years later. And they found congregations for her to serve, including our congregation of Racine, Wisconsin. What might our faith tradition look like today if we had found ways to receive and believe Ethelred Brown's calling in the same way that Ebenezer Fisher found a way to receive and believe Olympia Brown's? What are the stories in our nation's history that we need to receive and believe and learn in new ways? And what are the stories from our faith tradition that also need to be received and believed at long last? How might these change the way that we tell our own history and story, and how might they strengthen our spiritual practice of listening to one another, of receiving and believing our own experiences, each other's experiences, as the sacred stories, the sacred truths that they are? May we deepen our practice and may we receive these stories and shape a new story for a new day.